This is The Drop, the Grammy Museum's online interview and performance series. I'm your host, Scott Goldman. Our guest today rose to fame as runner-up on the 8th season of American Idol in 2009. He garnered chart success and critical acclaim for his solo albums, as well as the Grammy-nominated hit, What Do You Want From Me? In 2011, he stepped into the shoes of his idol, Freddie Mercury, as the lead singer with legendary rock band Queen. He's here today following the release of his 4th solo album entitled Velvet. Adam Lambert, welcome to The Drop.
Hey, hey.
Hey, thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
First, before we even talk about music, how you doing with the quarantine?
It's been strange, you know. Obviously, like the first couple weeks were a bit of an adjustment. And then I think I just got hit by this productivity bug. I was like, all right, fine. If I'm in, I'm in. And I ordered a bunch of recording equipment and a new microphone and all this stuff. And I taught myself how to use Logic on my computer. And I've been co-writing with people via Zoom. So I'm taking advantage of the situation.
Well, I've talked to a number of artists and songwriters. And look, given that there aren't any other distractions, it is a good opportunity to kind of focus on what you do.
That's exactly right. I feel like in a strange way, I'm more focused than I usually am. And there we go. I mean, I have nothing else to do but work.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, speaking of quarantine and the pandemic, you recently released a reworked version of We Are the Champions with Brian and Roger, and terrifically as a benefit for COVID relief. Tell us how that came about. What were you guys talking about?
You know, Brian was doing a handful of things on his Instagram. He was writing, like playing with people, doing sort of virtual jam sessions. And he had the idea to start doing Champions. And then it went over very well. And he contacted Roger to join in and add a drum part, which would make sense. And then they called me and they were like, hey, why don't you, put this in via your phone in your office like everybody else. And we, once we figured out the technical side of it, I was game. And we decided to dedicate it to the frontline workers. Mm-hmm. So we changed the title to You Are the Champions. And changing the lyrics of a Queen classic is pretty bold, but we figured this was the type of situation where, making that type of statement felt really good.
Sure. And it's terrific. How do you know how much money has been raised to this point?
Do you know, off the top of my head, I don't know the number, not off the top of my head, but I know that it did make a big splash and people seemed to like it. And they actually created a video montage to go along with it that was beautiful. We have our director that does all of our tour live camera work. He actually put this together for us and got footage from different parts of the world and medical staff. And actually Roger's daughter is featured in it because she is a doctor herself. Oh my gosh. I wasn't aware of that. Wow. Yeah. Very cool. Let's talk about the album. It's been 5 years since your last album. Why the break? Well, there's a number of reasons. One was, I needed an actual break after my last tour and album cycle. And then there was a period of time where I thought, well, I don't know what I want to do. So I was kind of looking for and waiting for inspiration. And also I made some business changes. I changed management a couple times. I changed labels. So that stuff kind of slowed down the process a bit. But I really also decided to sort of take my time creatively. I knew that whatever I was going to do, it needed to feel a bit different from what I had done in the past. I wanted to sort of wipe the slate clean and sort of reestablish who I am as a music artist.
Yeah, and I think some of that might play into, I'm always interested in titles. So tell me what Velvet means to you.
It's a mood. Velvet is a mood, it's a feeling. I mean, obviously we know what velvet feels like. It's smooth, it's soft, it's comfy. It's also sort of classic and retro. It's decadent, it's fashion. It's a bit camp, it's a bit ridiculous. And I guess I just kind of felt like it was the best word to sort of sum up the body of work that I've been creating. I came up with the album title before the album track. So I was in a session and we decided, hey, well, if you're going to call it Velvet, let's write a song called Velvet.
Yeah. Yeah. And how much of that, if you're thinking about Velvet, it's soft, it's smooth, how much of that goes to your vocals and the approach that you took on this album?
Yeah, you know, I definitely like tried to stretch myself as a vocalist on this and kind of go places I hadn't really gone before. The album as a whole, I think is a bit more soulful than my previous work. And tapping into that was a really good feeling. You know, it's funny. I think the reason why perhaps I hadn't been soulful in the past is because everything's always so rushed. And you get in a writing room and you write a song with great songwriters and you're all excited about it and you throw down a demo, and then because of scheduling and, you know, what have you, you don't get back in to actually sort of rework it. People are just like, oh, it sounds good, let's go. So I think that there's sort of that quick on the fly thing. There is some magic that happens from it. But as a singer myself, I like to live in a song for a little while. And the longer I sort of live in it and I have it in my body, the more authentic it comes out. And I think with this project, because I took my time and because I worked on these songs through different phases and sort of different incarnations, it became more authentic. It became more real. It came from a good spot, you know, from my guts.
And I think some of that is really becoming comfortable with the song and what you're writing and the attention. You know, so often you hear from songwriters that, oh, this song came to me in 15 minutes and the whole thing was done. Okay, I mean, that's great when that happens, but it's also very interesting to talk to people who want to live with something for a while.
Yeah, I think it's also really easy as a songwriter to get really excited about a great session, you know, where you had good vibes with the people you're working with, you love them, it was fun, and you sort of hang on to the moment, the feeling of the moment, and that sort of informs how you feel about the song. But the longer you sort of give yourself to sit with it, you can be a little more objective about the work that you created. That's been really good for me. That's been really good. Yeah.
I read an interview with you, and you said something really interesting about this particular creative process, making this record, and how you wanted to protect it. And I think I have this right, to protect it from the business.
Yeah, you know, I think over the past 10 years, like I've had a lot of interesting moments happen for me, and you know, coming off of a show like Idol, which was this huge juggernaut at the time, it was like a big splash and it was very fast, a lot of expectations. And then, you know, I got out on the scene and I sort of experimented with different ways that I wanted to put myself out there. Some successful, some met with some controversy. And, you know, it's been like a kind of an up and down ride. And I think one of the things that I started feeling was that I was allowing myself to get sort of sucked into the numbers game. You know, like we tend to, in the music business, measure a worth of a project by how many streams it has or how many units has been sold or views on YouTube or whatever. And I get that. And, you know, if something's popular, that's great. We love it, especially with pop music. But I started relying on those types of pieces of information to tell me whether or not I was doing a good job. Mm-hmm. And I think I had to kind of get back to the drawing and work on a personal level, work on feeling a sense of accomplishment and feeling my own version of success with what I was putting out, regardless of what commercial splash it made. And that's a little tricky because the whole business is geared toward it. Mm. And I think with Velvet in particular, I sort of switched off that part of my brain and really tried to focus on my creative sensibilities, what made me happy, what made me feel something, and what seemed like me, regardless of, will this work? Will this be a hit?
I think one of the things that I like about this album is I love the way it sounds, and particularly because I think you're going back to some of the sounds you heard growing up.
Absolutely.
In terms of kind of where sonically the direction of this record. Talk a little bit about that. What were you hearing as you were making the album?
You know, I grew up, my parents they're really cool, by the way. My parents are cool. I can brag about that. They had an amazing vinyl collection around the house. And my dad was actually a DJ in college. So he had a lot of vinyl from the 70s and the early 80s. And my mom had quite a collection as well. My dad, you know, was like a deadhead, you know.
I already like your dad.
Yeah. So like I grew up with, you know, sort of like, you know, a hippie, hippie adjacent. And then my mom had a real taste for maybe more soulful music. You know, she listened to Al Green and Sly the Family Stone. And I heard a lot of that stuff growing up. We heard Bob Marley around the pool every weekend. And then my dad had more of the sort of prog rock kind of sensibility. I think it just soaked in through osmosis, you know? And when I was kind of going back to the drawing board to figure out what I wanted to do for this album, in an effort to figure out what was the most authentic to me, I just started listening to stuff that I grew up with, as opposed to what was currently on Top 40. And it triggered a lot of great energy for me, you know, a lot of nostalgia and feeling of home and the feeling of family, and it just made me happy. And so that was sort of my playlist. I think it just soaked in through osmosis, you know? And when I was kind of going back to the drawing board to figure out what I wanted to do for this album, in an effort to figure out what was the most authentic to me, I just started listening to stuff that I grew up with, as opposed to what was currently on Top 40. And it triggered a lot of great energy for me, you know, a lot of nostalgia and feeling of home and the feeling of family, and it just made me happy. And so that was sort of my playlist while I was in the writing process. And in addition to that, I was searching current music for the non-radio Top 40 stuff, for the more alternative indie material that's out there that's incredible. You know, artists like Tame Impala, who I just like fell in love with. Lots of bands, lots of Sports is a band that I love. There's like a whole list. I could go on, but I just sort of like switched gears, and whatever it triggered felt like it was coming out in a very natural way.
You know, speaking of your parents' record collection, so you've got Nile Rodgers on the track Roses.
Yeah.
And first of all, how did you come to work with Nile?
Well, Nile and I have actually known each other now for a while. Back when I put out my second album, Trespassing, Sam Sparrow and I were writing a track, and we said, well, we need, you know, disco Nile Rodgers guitar. And he said, well, let's just write him on Twitter. And so we did, and Nile responded because he's lovely, and he guested on that track. So this was a while back. After that, we became friendly. I did a couple gigs with him and Chic out and around the country, just guest singing, like Let's Dance or, you know, Good Times or whatever. And then we actually wrote with Avicii. He had a track that he was working on for Avicii's big album, and called me and said, hey, I got this song, come down to the studio. So I did. That was one of the stories where we literally did it in 20 minutes. One of the few for me. Yeah. It was like, I wrote the lyrics, like sitting there for the verse on the fly. He had the chorus written. I ran into the studio. I wasn't even warmed up. I was like, ah. A month later, I find out that it's, you know, Avicii's turned it into one of his masterpieces, and it was on his album, and it's called Lay Me Down. So Nile and I, like, we have this great history, and I was writing Roses with a couple people, Kez and Fred Ball, and we did the same thing. We called Nile, and there he is. Being a genius as usual.
He is. Yeah, he is a genius, no question. One of the things you did on this album, as perhaps maybe as opposed to some of the earlier work, lots of analog instruments, musicians in the studio, not a lot of creating in the box, so to speak. How does working in that context change you as a singer and a songwriter?
Well, I think hearing an instrument in the room helps me tap into the soulful part of my voice. I mean, you feel it. You feel what an electric guitar through an amp sounds like. You know, it cuts through you. A drum set in a room makes you move differently. You know, I was working with Tommy English, who's incredible, on the title track, or not the title, on Superpower and on Loverboy. And Superpower is actually one of the early tracks that we had created for this project that helps sort of define the direction. And Ilse, who was one of the songwriters on that with us, she actually played the drums. So she sat down behind the drum set when we were coming up with the first groove. Tommy has his guitar in his hand. I'm in the corner on the couch, you know, with like incense burning all around my head. And it just felt so real. It felt like what I feel when I get to be on stage with Brian and Roger. And I think that was something that I realized really quickly, is that I wanted to approach things that way for this project, because it brings out something special, you know?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Brian and Roger, and we could go through some of the, kind of influences that you hear in this record, whether it's, Bowie or Prince or Motown.
Yeah.
But Queen has to be in your blood.
I think by this time,
Yeah.
I'm an adopted member of the family, I think.
Yeah.
That's what they say anyway. And yeah, I mean, with Superpower, for example, that has some DNA of Queen in there somewhere. And it is something that I can proudly say I didn't consciously think about. It does just sort of now kind of live in me, which is awesome. It's such a blessing to be on the road with them, continued till today. And I know that I've grown as an artist and as a musician because of them. And as a performer because of these audiences, that love the band. It's been an amazing decade. I mean,
obviously a legendary band, and Brian and Roger, those guys have seen everything there is to see in rock and roll.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering from your perspective, what have you learned? What have you learned from spending time with those guys?
I think there's an element of sort of not sweating the small stuff. They're so focused. They don't get sidetracked with, the usual BS. They're very focused on doing the best work they possibly can. Their work ethic is really strong. We get on stage, we have fun, but it's like we're all on our A game all the time. And when we get off stage and meet up, for a meal, or we're flying to the next city the next day, we literally go through the show and talk about what worked, what didn't work, what we want to try different. We really are always trying to top ourselves as a unit. And that, you don't get that with a lot of bands that usually would probably just rest on their laurels.
Especially at that level, for sure.
Yeah. They're legends, and they still want it to be amazing. It's really inspiring to be around that energy.
In addition to performing with Queen, you were talking about collaborating with songwriters and working in the studio. Collaboration obviously is the key to so much about making music.
Absolutely.
What makes you a good collaborator?
I think one of the things that I've gotten even more comfortable with is really not knowing the most in the room. I don't think I do. I'm a pretty opinionated guy, and I tend to debate things and play devil's advocate, but especially with this album, it was the producers and the co-writers on here were people that I really wanted to work with, and getting in the room with them, it was a lot of, letting them do what they do so well and lead. I just sing and, fix my hair. Of course, I co-wrote everything on the album. I was a writer on everything, but I can't claim full credit for why it sounds the way it sounds. I worked with unbelievable producers and writers who are incredible at what they do. And so I think more and more every year, I think I'm able to be more humble, I guess. I feel like I'll walk into a studio and someone will show me something and I'll be like, I'm blown away. Please explain what that is and let me dive in.
Yeah.
I'm lucky that way. I'm lucky that I get to be paired up with that level,
in the digital world in which we find ourselves, and more so now perhaps than ever, artists are releasing songs basically as they finish them. And they're just kind of putting them out rather than waiting for kind of the traditional album cycle. And I know you released part A of this last year, and now the full album is out. How do you feel about that approach? Do you still look at an album as a body of work?
I do. I mean, I think, especially with Velvet, I mean, it is a sound. It's a consistent mood. It's a journey, whatever. It's a little departure from what you usually hear, so it is an experience. But we released this thing in parts. We did sort of an EP called Side A, which was sort of an advanced sort of first half of the tracks. And I just wanted to do things a little bit out of the box with this project. I don't think that there are any rules anymore. As we know, like, people are consuming music in a new way. And I guess I just kind of wanted to extend the experience for fans. With regular album cycles, the traditional model, it's like you put out a single or two, and then the album, and you do some promotion, and it's all done. And it just kind of feels like the event is very quick. And with this, I wanted to build interest, and get people excited and get people into the world. The first single I released for this it's called New Eyes, and wasn't a typical first single. It's not a big in your face thing. It's a mood, it's a vibe. I did it an untraditional way. I just wanted to have something that set the tone a little bit. It was sort of to get people in the mood, like an appetizer.
and one of the things you did, speaking of not traditional, you put this out on a relatively small indie label, Empire, yeah. I believe.
Yeah.
Why was that the best choice?
Well, at the time, it just seemed like the right move, and it is the right move. They gave me a lot of creative freedom on this, and I have to say, like, I've had amazing experiences with the major labels that I've been on, but with Velvet, I had such a vision for it, and I was so certain of what I wanted it to be, that I didn't really want to make a lot of compromises on the music and on how it looked and how it felt. And I was really drawn into this experience with Empire because they were hands-off in the creative. They allowed me to drive it. And that felt really good. I don't know if that's what I want to do every time in the future, but I think that for me, with this project in particular, at this moment in time in my artistry and my life, I needed it. I needed to sort of like prove something to myself, and prove something to the people that I work with, Yeah. Yeah. It feels like it was a very empowering project. Yeah.
So we got a few minutes left, and there are a couple of things I have to ask you about. One, you did a performance of the song "Believe," the Kennedy Center Honors, which was, first of all, you completely kind of reimagined the song, and if I remember correctly, I think you made Cher cry. Tell me about how do you approach that, because this relates to Queen in that here is a classic song. People know every note. They know how it sounds.
Yep.
How do you approach a song like that and make it yours?
The idea, when I heard that Cher was being honored at the Kennedy Center, I was talking to the person that books it, and a light bulb went off right away. And I said, hey, I have an idea. I actually did sort of a prototype version of this on American Idol, but it wasn't on the live shows that were televised. It was during that Hollywood week that they do before everybody, the big camp. And I did this with Believe. I slowed it down and turned it into a ballad. And everyone looked at me when I told them what I was going to do like I was nuts. And even when I got up and sang it, they were like, huh? But something about it felt really special. I remember really liking the way it felt to sing. And so the light bulb went off, and I said, hey, I got an idea. And I talked to Ricky Minor, who was doing all the musical arrangements. And he was like, okay. And he ran it up the flagpole, and they were like, well, it's such a famous song. Maybe we should do it as a dance thing like it was originally done. And I said, please, just believe me on this. I think it might be a moment. And they went, okay. And they were very sweet, and we put it together, and Ricky did an incredible arrangement with his band and orchestra and strings behind. And we got to rehearsal, and it just felt so good. I'm really glad that they took a chance on this idea. And I got to tell you, I flew in from London that morning, red eye. I was so turned around and jet lagged. I got out on stage, you know, it was like 9 o'clock at night. I hadn't slept all day. And I was like, oh, I'm really nervous. The adrenaline hit me and it didn't know what to do, you know, and I was like, my hands were shaking, Cher's up there, everybody's like in beautiful tuxedos and gowns. And I was like, okay, just, you know, stick to it. And I actually think that sort of, you know, that frame of mind I was in actually created a real vulnerable moment, which was really exciting.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
It was such an honor.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions, and going back to Queen just for a second, how did the film Bohemian Rhapsody change things, or did it?
I think it did. I mean, you know, we were doing really well before the film as a touring act. You know, we've been touring now since 2014, officially, and I think the film just sort of reminded people of the magic of that catalog of music, and of the talent of the band, and I think it reached a lot of new people as well. I mean, what I noticed after the movie is that our audiences became way more varied. A lot more young people than we've ever had, you know, multiple generations. And it just sort of hit the zeitgeist, I guess, the Bohemian Rhapsody. It was a huge hit. Obviously, you know, it got honored, you know, with nominations and just a renewed interest, I think, in Freddie and the band. And it was very exciting. It's been great.
So I've got one more question for you. We were talking about the single you released for COVID relief, but I really can't let you get away without talking about the Feel Something Foundation.
Yes.
Tell me about the organization and what your goals are.
Well, I named it after one of the songs on Velvet. It's the very last track. You know, I've been going through, over the course of my writing process on this, I went through some emotional stuff, some mental health stuff, sort of for the first time, or was dealing or facing stuff for the first time that I hadn't really dealt with before. Some anxiety issues, definitely some ups and downs. And that was what the song was written about. It was sort of this sort of feeling of, this feeling of discontent and emptiness. And I started talking to my team about wanting to put together a foundation, a charitable foundation, to sort of give back, to take that energy and help people who also feel that way. And in particular, the thing that it's always been near and dear to my heart is the queer community. You know, LGBTQ, that's where I come from. That's me. That's what I've been fighting for since day one. That's what I've been, you know, identifying as proudly. And it's, you know, we're a community that need all the help that we can get. And especially in this day and age, you know, we're opening up a lot of new conversations. It's not just gay and lesbian anymore. We have the non-binary, we have the trans community. We're more hyper aware now, especially of late, of the intersection of people of color and the queer community. It's a very, very important group to look at. And I put together this foundation as a way to sort of summon my fans' passion and energy and support to gather funds to re-inject into different community groups. We're going to be putting together some lecture series, I think. We're going to be doing some outreach. I want to focus on sort of arts education with the queer community, especially with young people. Yeah, that's sort of my proactive project. And then we're also looking at homelessness as an issue and mental health as an issue, like I said. So these three components sort of make up our directive. And I'm very excited. I put it together with a friend of mine. My team is really involved. And so far, we already did, we raised money for my birthday. in the name of my birthday, my fans donated. We also did an auction of old stage costumes and raised over $20,000.
Oh, wow.
Which we actually just re-injected into the LGBTQ Freedom Fund, which is a Black-led organization who are focusing right now on helping people that were peacefully protesting post bail to get out of any jail or any medical issues that they had incurred via the police.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
And what a perfect button to put on the conversation here during Pride Month. So,
Absolutely.
Adam Lambert, we are so pleased that you took the time. The album is called Velvet. We hope everybody's out streaming it as we speak, and hopefully the next time we do this, it'll be in our theater at the Grammy Museum.
Non-quarantine.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was great talking to you.
Good talking to you.